They built it, they unleashed it, then they buried it. The Detroit Diesel 20V149 wasn't just an engine, it was a warning, a 20-cylinder, two-stroke nightmare that shook the ground and shattered expectations. But here's the big question. Why did Detroit Diesel even make something so unhinged in the first place? Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll understand why this mechanical demon was never forgotten and why it still haunts engine bays today. What is the Detroit Diesel 20V149 and why did it exist? The Detroit Diesel 20V149 sounds like a code name for a secret weapon. And honestly, that's not far off. This engine was part of the infamous 149 series. Detroit Diesel's line of two-stroke, high-displacement diesel engines originally designed for massive industrial tasks. But the 20V149 took things so far that even seasoned engineers raised their eyebrows. Let's break it down. Each of the 20 cylinders displaced 149 cubic inches. That's almost 2.5 liters per cylinder. Multiply that by 20, and you've got a jaw-dropping 2,980 horsepower in some configurations, with torque figures that could rip asphalt off a road. And this wasn't for military tanks or rocket launches. This was used in tugboats, power generators, and mining equipment. It was essentially 5 V4 engines stacked together in one Frankenstein-like formation. But this wasn't just about power, it was a statement. A mechanical, anything you can do, I can do louder and meaner. Detroit Diesel wasn't responding to a customer request, they were responding to an arms race. Horsepower was the currency, and the 20V149 was their atomic bomb. In its early days, this engine was seen as revolutionary, but that perception quickly turned. It became clear that what they'd built was less of a marvel and more of a menace. Too big, too loud, too much for the world to handle. Now imagine being in a room with this thing running. No earplugs, no warning. Just 20 massive pistons firing off every single revolution, blasting sound waves that go through your bones. That's what the 20V149 did. It didn't run. It rumbled, it roared, it terrorized. You didn't hear it as much as you survived it. The size of the engine alone was absurd. It weighed over 5,000 pounds dry. Add fluids, mounting gear, and any attachments, you're pushing closer to 6,000. That's more than some pickup trucks weigh. Installing it wasn't just an engineering task, it was a logistical nightmare. Fuel consumption? Laughable. It could go through hundreds of gallons per hour depending on the load. Emissions? Black smoke so thick it looked like a volcanic eruption. Entire areas around plants and shipyards would turn gray just from a few minutes of idle time. Environmentalists called it diesel hell. Mechanics called it a Tuesday. And the noise, oh, the noise. You didn't need to see it to know it was running. You could feel the building shaking from a block away. In fact, in one recorded case, a test run of the engine caused the windows of a nearby office to crack. People actually filed noise complaints at an industrial yard. That should tell you everything. The 20V149 wasn't just big, it was too big. It was a mechanical flex that came at a price, one that Detroit Diesel would soon have to reckon with. Inside the beast. Why this engine was a nightmare to maintain. Let's talk about what made the 20V149 tick, and what made it such a terrifying headache for anyone who had to work on it. First off, this was a two-stroke engine. That means it fired once per crankshaft revolution, twice as often as a four-stroke engine. That results in massive constant combustion, non-stop heat, non-stop pressure, non-stop chaos. Every single part inside the engine was under relentless stress. If something was even slightly off, timing, lubrication, fuel flow, it didn't just underperform, it failed catastrophically. And the internals, ridiculously complex, dual crankshafts, multiple turbochargers, superchargers on some versions, and a cooling system that needed constant attention. The injectors had to be perfectly tuned. Even the valve covers were massive slabs of steel that took muscle and precision just to remove. Servicing it wasn't a job, it was a punishment. Entire teams of mechanics would be assigned just to keep these engines running, especially in marine or mining applications. A simple oil change wasn't simple at all. It could take hours, cost hundreds, and still result in a leak or pressure problem the next day. Worse yet, when the engine did fail, it failed loud. Rods would punch through engine blocks. Turbochargers would shred themselves. And good luck finding parts in the middle of a jungle mining site or on a shipping vessel 300 miles from port. It was legendary, but it was also cursed. When it worked, it was magic. When it didn't, it was dangerous. Here's the thing. When this engine was dialed in, when it was properly maintained, when the conditions were just right, the 20V149 was unstoppable. It could power an entire site, push enormous loads, and hold steady under the worst weather conditions imaginable. It became the heart of massive machinery, huge excavators, deep-sea tugs, and standby generators that kept oil refineries running during blackouts. People who worked around it respected it like a force of nature. You didn't use the 20V149. You unleashed it. But when it failed, it didn't stall quietly. One engine failure involved a piston rod snapping at high RPM and punching through both the engine block and the wall of the shipping container housing it. Oil sprayed everywhere. A nearby mechanic had to dive for cover. These engines could, and did, explode in dramatic fashion. If you were lucky, you just lost the machine. If you weren't, you were filing a very serious incident report. And here's where it gets even crazier. Despite all the danger, there's still a hardcore group of diesel lovers who miss this engine. They talk about it like a myth, a beast from a better time. Which brings us to the next part. And trust me, you're gonna want to stick around, because what some people are doing with the 20V149 now will blow your mind. The resurrection, why the 20V149 refuses to die. You'd think this engine was long gone, banned, scrapped, buried, and officially it is. Detroit Diesel no longer produces the 20V149. Emissions laws buried it, efficiency trends passed it by, and even the industries it once dominated, marine, mining, and power generation, have long since moved on to cleaner, quieter, smarter engines. On paper, the monster should have been history, a footnote in diesel engineering. But in the real world, this beast refuses to die. On YouTube, engine expos, back alley machine shops, and diesel forums that look like they haven't been updated since 2003, this engine is coming back to life, and not just as nostalgia. It's becoming an icon, a symbol of unfiltered mechanical chaos. Mechanics and diesel fanatics are dragging these things out of swamps, off abandoned work barges, and from the deepest corners of industrial scrapyards. Engines that haven't turned over in 30 years are getting full rebuilds. Rusty, oil-caked blocks are being blasted, restored, and fired up, usually with a handheld camcorder pointed right at the exhaust. Cold starts? Oh yeah. Entire YouTube channels are now dedicated to capturing the spine-rattling moment when all 20 cylinders roar to life again. Rebuilds are filmed step by step, and every growl, rattle, and shake is worshipped like it's sacred. This isn't about efficiency or even functionality. It's about something deeper. It's about emotion. It's about hearing what real power used to sound like. These engines are getting dropped into show trucks, not to haul freight, but to perform. At diesel meets and truck festivals, people crowd around just to feel the sheer force of the engine's sound wave. One guy even bolted a 20V149 to a custom generator rig, just to power an entire concert stage at a diesel expo. This engine was supposed to be a relic. Instead, it's become a legend. And like any good monster from the past, it keeps coming back, louder and meaner than ever. Why Detroit buried the 20V149 and why it still haunts us today. Eventually, even Detroit Diesel had to admit defeat. By the time the 1990s rolled around, the walls were closing in from all sides. Emissions regulations were tightening across the globe, especially in the US government's wanted engines that didn't leave clouds of soot in the air. Fuel prices were creeping higher, making gas-guzzling monsters harder to justify. And the industry itself? It was evolving. Smarter, smaller, more efficient engines were the future. And the Detroit Diesel 20V149? It was a relic, a throwback to a time when more was always better. More cylinders, more fuel, more noise. Eventually, Detroit had no choice but to pull the plug. Production ended. The tooling was retired. The factory floors that once echoed with the sounds of these behemoths went silent. Slowly, support began to disappear. Technical manuals became rare finds, showing up only in old diesel libraries or collector circles. Spare parts became harder to source and more expensive when you could find them. For many, it became easier to scrap the engine than to fix it. But something strange happened. The engine didn't disappear into obscurity. It didn't fade away. It became something bigger, a legend, a ghost of diesel's wild past. Because while modern engines became cleaner, they also became quieter, safer, duller. What once felt powerful and dangerous was now replaced by silent electric motors and digital control modules. The 20V149 became a symbol of what we lost. It was everything modern engines are not. Loud, brutal, raw, unapologetically overbuilt, and totally alive. It wasn't refined, it wasn't subtle, and that's exactly why people remember it. In a world filled with hybrids, EVs, and engines you can't even hear, hearing a 20V149 fire up is like opening a time capsule with a stick of dynamite inside. It's not just noise, it's rebellion, and it's glorious. The horrifying truth about the Detroit diesel 20V149 isn't that it was too big, too loud, or too dangerous. It's that we miss it. In an era of efficiency, the 20V149 stands as a brutal, brilliant piece of mechanical insanity. It didn't care about rules. It didn't care about emissions. It only cared about power, and it delivered that in overwhelming, unforgettable ways. So if this video lit up something inside you, whether it's respect, nostalgia, or just pure fascination, do us a favor. Hit that like button. Drop a comment with your wildest diesel memory, and subscribe for more deep dives into the machines the world tried to forget. And if you ever hear a deep, thunderous rumble echoing across an industrial yard, don't be scared. That's just the 20V149, reminding you it's still very much alive.